Well, by this afternoon, the president's 6-month moratorium on deepwater drilling in the Gulf of Mexico could actually be tossed out. It's all up to a federal judge in New Orleans. Supporters of the ban say that it's prudent on the heels of an unprecedented disaster. But critics are saying that it's a job killer, and they question why it's needed at all. Joining us to dig deeper now on this debate from Stamford, Connecticut, oil industry analyst Peter Butel, and from Washington, John Hofmeister, the former president of Shell Oil. Thanks to both of you for being with us this morning.
Thank you.
So as we talked about, this could come down today, this ruling by a judge. John, you've called the drilling moratorium an overreaction to the disaster. Explain why.
Well, I think the president was in a position where he wanted to show that he was in control, and he made I think, a political decision to try to demonstrate that, but for no good reason. These 33 rigs were all inspected after the explosion. They all passed inspection. We have to continue drilling if we're going to have the 20 million barrels of oil that we need every day to get through the day. There's no basis, in fact, to suggest that these rigs were anything other than operating according to their permits.
Yet, according to some of our reporting, the Deepwater Horizon rig also passed its safety check, and look what happened. So how can you trust that, whatever it is that they're doing to check the safety is actually up to par in the wake of this disaster, John?
No, that's true, and I think the Deepwater Horizon in the fullness of time will appear just like a plane crash. A perfectly normal rig operating, but with human factors that led to this horrible accident and the explosion and the blowout. I think evidence is now showing some pretty poor human judgments about how the operations were being conducted, and that is not the case on the other rigs, at least not to anybody's knowledge, and so I think that they should be allowed to continue to operate.
And Peter, what's your take on the on this 6-month moratorium? I mean, if you listen to half the people, they say you could have spot checked these 33 rigs that are currently operating and let it go now, or others who say 6 months isn't nearly enough time. So is 6 months as a moratorium just an arbitrary date?
Yes, it is, and I agree with everything that's just been said. The big problem is these decisions are being made based on the graphic that everybody now has as a screensaver or on television of this bubbling oil coming up from the bottom of the ocean. And it's making people a little bit crazy, really. They see this. It's a dreadful, horrible catastrophe. But basically, a lot of decisions are being based on this graphic of bubbling oil. And they're saying, well, if they can't solve this problem, then what are they going to do if the absolute worst occurs with any of these other 33?
Right, and you're saying that that's an emotional decision. I mean, it's a reality that whether we see that 24/7 or not, it's happening.
It is, and I agree. But the one thing that I'm very surprised at and very disappointed with is that the oil industry hasn't put together an A-team of its best engineers, divers, roughnecks, and solved this problem live on television while we're looking at this bubbling oil coming up. Because if that were to happen, people would say, okay, at least we know how to solve it if the very worst happens. But they see this bubbling crude. They say, what do we do if the worst happens? There apparently is no answer to that, and as a result, we do have this reaction. I'm not saying that what we have is no catastrophe. I'm not trying to downplay it at all. I'm just saying that a lot of the decisions being taken are being taken in response to this, the public relations aspect.
And John, just paint for us quickly what, in terms of this 6-month moratorium, what it would mean financially, in your opinion, not only for people that are working all of these rigs and the services industries that are offshoots of them, but also for our oil consumption here in America.
In the first case, it wouldn't be 6 months, because these rigs can't sit there at $500,000 a day and not be productive. They will leave the Gulf of Mexico, going to Brazil, Angola, other places around the world. So the 6 months will extend to a year, year and a half, even 2 years. And during that time, the people in the Gulf, upwards of 50 to 60,000 people, would have nothing to do. Now, some of the rig workers would go with the rigs, but the support staff that keep the rigs going every day, they would just be out of work. And the U.S. would be out of oil.
Right, and so what does that mean economically for the average person?
Well, I think for the average consumer, you could expect $1 to $1.50 on a gallon of gas. by about 2012 when they're in the midst of an election. And for the average worker, that's, the cost will be in the billions of dollars of lost wages and lost economic value.
All right, as we said, a judge could rule today on whether or not to overrule this moratorium. But I thank both of you for your input this morning, John Hofmeister as well as Peter Butel. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, the first day of summer turned violent in Wisconsin. A devastating tornado causing tremendous damage there. Homes destroyed, thousands